As we begin a new and turbulent week, we are still trying to make some sense of that plot against the governor of Michigan foiled by the feds last week. Now, we know the plot was to kidnap Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer, then to put her on some sort of, show trial, charging her with crimes against the Constitution, and then the plan to then execute her. 13 men are under arrest, many members of a Michigan militia group, with several also linked to white supremacist groups. Some are also ardent Trump supporters, while at least one a self-declared anarchist who opposes the president. Now, of course, after the plot was busted, the president, he went after Governor Whitmer for many of the same reasons as her accusers allegedly wanted to kidnap her over.
It was my Justice Department that arrested them. But instead, she goes and does her little political act, and she keeps her state closed. What she's doing is a horrible thing to the people. The churches are closed, the schools are closed, and the whole state is closed, and people are being hurt very badly by it.
Now, this weekend, Governor Whitmer responded, pointing the finger of blame at the president.
I do believe that there are still serious threats that groups like this group, these domestic terrorists, are finding comfort and support in the rhetoric coming out of Republican leadership from the White House to our state house.
Now, the evidence certainly suggests that she's onto something. The nation has seen a spike in white nationalism that is in sync to the rise of Trump in American politics. Even the Homeland Security Department views white nationalism as the deadliest potential domestic terror threat to the United States. And for more, we turn to Katherine Schweit. Katherine, she ran the Bureau's active shooter program, which focuses on ways to prevent, respond, and recover from violent incidents. And she spent a lot of time focusing on these militia groups. You have 20 years in the FBI, and I'm curious, after McVeigh and the attack on the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, there was a conscious effort, wasn't there, from federal law enforcement to take very seriously these fringe group threats here, and they really cracked down on them. And that happened in the aftermath of those attacks, didn't it?
Absolutely. We saw in the 90s, right? And of course, Oklahoma City was a bad result of what happens when people who are focused on damaging innocent civilians, hurting innocent civilians. Oklahoma City was really kind of our first big marked domestic terrorist event in the United States. And after that, I was in the FBI at that time. I worked white supremacist cases and domestic terrorist cases, as well as international terrorist cases, but really in Wisconsin and Chicago. And our biggest threats did come from that area, came from the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, the people who were anarchists. And I think that, it's valuable to differentiate between the types of groups and what their particular support, efforts might be, what they're looking for. Some are looking to eliminate the country. Some are looking to create a white country. So it's more like a Venn diagram to put them together, where everybody has their own little particular interest. But since the 2000s, the FBI absolutely has been focused on that. I worked on several of those cases up in Wisconsin myself.
What's different, at least in my memory, is these groups think, at least they believe, that they have an ally in the president. I want to play a clip that many people saw, this coming from the first and only presidential debate.
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Now, they made T-shirts out of that, the Proud Boys. You heard Governor Whitmer in my setup. She believes that he's giving comfort and support with that kind of rhetoric, and he's inciting more domestic terror. We all remember what happened in Charlottesville. The White House is planning a sympathetic move to the Kenosha shooter. The point is, people can read into things as much as they want, but it is different than before. Can you remember another time in recent history where at least they believe they have an ally in the White House?
Well, certainly not an ally in the White House, that's for sure. Another time in history when we saw this kind of emboldened actions, certainly we've had a handful, no one at this level, the stature. When I worked in Chicago, we had a gentleman who I won't name him here, but everybody who works the cases knows he ended up he's doing 40 years in prison for trying to hire somebody to kill a federal district court judge. But he was the leader of a white supremacist group and bragged about it. And when he had an individual who, after this particular individual was denied his law license by the state of Illinois, his follower went on a shooting spree, a 3-day shooting spree, killing and wounding African Americans, Jews in the West Rogers Park area in Chicago. Ricky Birdsong, the first Black coach for the Northwestern University basketball team. And at the time, that particular leader, his first name is Matt, that particular leader, he touted how that guy who was involved in all that killing spree, he was a martyr. I think that's kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing people who are emboldened and encouraged to do it because they might get that call out. And they, just like the Proud Boys did, they got a call out, and they're right after that, they're making shirts up.
And front row of some of these rallies, you see the Oath Keepers. You have this fringe, I still can't understand it for the life of me, Katherine, but the QAnon movement, that somehow it's gaining traction here. To me, it's a mix. You're right. They're not all the same agendas. They don't all want the same different things here. But that where they may have lurked in shadows, they now proudly will wear the T-shirts in public, and they believe that they're on the right side of history. And for folks like yourself who used to combat this, when the administration didn't want to make front and center, this current one at least, that white nationalists with a major domestic terror threat, if not the greatest one, did you sometimes feel like you were fighting with one arm tied behind your back?
Yeah, I would say that not when I was working it, right? But certainly I have. I still have a big crowd in the FBI and in working in federal government. I'm here in the Washington D.C. area, and it is frustrating. And when we hear out of the White House, my Justice Department, it's the American People's Justice Department, and their job is to do what they can to protect all citizens in the United States. We saw certainly in 2000 forward, we saw this huge growth, and a lot of it was the fact that we have an internet and people can interconnect on the internet, and so they cherry pick people who they kind of like their opinions, and now it's okay to go out. And I think it's really important to know that if you read the materials on these gentlemen who are charged against the governor of Michigan, those individuals also talked about killing police officers, not a little bit, killing police officers a lot. These are people who don't believe in a government. This particular group doesn't believe in a government. So they're just basically domestic terrorists who want to take down our way of life.
And Katherine, what really concerns me, and you forgot more than I'll ever know, is I saw the images in Lansing well before this plot was ever discovered, where you have guys with AR-15s, maskless, going up there in the State House feeling they're emboldened, and they're getting tweets out about liberate the state and all the rest. Now, fast forward with the last 3 weeks that we have before an election, I got a president telling everyone that if he loses, it's illegitimate, you won't have a legitimate president and all the rest, and that interregnum from November 3rd till we count all the votes. Lord knows what some of these folks might be egged on here. It's a volatile mix. I can only imagine what the FBI and other law enforcement are trying to do to preserve the peace until whatever the next chapter of American history is.
No, I think you're spot on when you say that, because it is a matchstick situation. I worked, as I said, I worked this area for a long time, and you spend time talking to people who have these views, and I think that it's really easy for sometimes for Americans to say, "Oh, those guys with guns," or to dismiss people that are gun owners or Second Amendment supporters as the bad guys. And it isn't that. It's much more of a fine tune than that. There's 300 million people in the United States, 400 or 500 million guns in the United States. It's not the gun owners per se, but when you put a gun in the hand of somebody who might be that matchstick. And so the Bureau is walking around, as all investigators are working in this area, you're walking around and in and through these massive groups of people that you see and you hear talking about incendiary things, which talking is perfectly legal in the United States. In 2010, 5 people were charged with in Michigan to overthrow with the allegations to overthrow the government, and those charges were dismissed because the judge said they were just talking. And that line between talking and when you act is such a fine line. And if that's a matchstick thrown into a haystack, it doesn't take much.
Katherine Schweit, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Donald Trump has a long history of being on the wrong side of racial issues, from his policies and pronouncements as president to his headline-grabbing moments as a wannabe celebrity to the lessons learned from his father. We're going to track the president's ugly history when it comes to race next.